You ever lay still in the dark and feel your whole world collapse in real time? That was me. Thursday night, 11:47 p.m. The bedroom smelled like her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the one I bought her for our 7th anniversary. The fan was humming. And I was supposed to be asleep. I wasn't. My name is Joel DeWitt. 38 years old. Born in Atlanta, built a logistics company from a rented pickup truck and a dream. DeWitt Express, 14 trucks, 22 employees, contracts with 4 major distributors. That company was my blood. My sweat. My father's legacy, because he drove trucks his whole life and never owned a single one. My wife, Renee, was downstairs. I'd heard her murmur "hold on" before creeping to the living room around 11. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual? She locked the door. I came down quietly. 14 years of marriage teaches you which stairs creak. I knew every single one. Through the crack in the door, I heard a voice I didn't recognize, a man's voice, clipped and precise. Renee laughed. That fake laugh she uses when she's nervous. Joel won't know until the papers hit his hands, she said. My chest went cold. Not the kind of cold you get from AC. The kind that moves through your bones. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, barely breathing. The man on the phone said something about timeline and asset valuation. Renee said, "Good. He always thought he was smarter than everybody." That sentence. Right there. That's the one that cracked me open. Because she was right about one thing, I did think I was smart. What I didn't know was how long I'd been living inside a lie. I should have walked away. Every rational part of me said move, go upstairs, breathe. But my feet were concrete. Dwight says the valuation comes in around $2.3 million, the man's voice said through the phone. Clean split in Georgia gives her half. But if we file first and establish the business as marital property from inception. It was marital property from inception, Renee cut him off. Her voice was sharp, confident, like she'd rehearsed this. He started it the year we got married. I typed his first invoices on my laptop. Typing invoices. That was her contribution. I'd worked 18-hour days. I'd slept in the truck twice. I'd missed Thanksgiving in 2017 because a contract fell through and I had to personally drive a shipment to Savannah to save the relationship with our biggest client. The man, I learned later his name was Philip Gaines, Esquire, said, "Perfect. We'll argue co-founder status through labor contribution and shared financial risk. It'll hold." And the accounts? Renee asked. He'll have no access once we freeze them through the injunction. We file at 9 a.m. By 10, his accounts are locked. He won't be able to pay his drivers. They'll walk. The company collapses without operations. Then it's worth nothing, except to whoever buys the assets. A pause. Then Renee said, "And that buyer would be?" "A holding company Philip Gaines Associates controls," he said smoothly. "We buy the shell at 5 cents on the dollar." I bit down so hard on my lip I tasted blood. They weren't just divorcing me. They were dismantling everything I built, and profiting off the wreckage. My father's voice echoed in my head. "Son, the only thing they can't take is what they can't find." I pulled out my phone and started walking. Donnell Washington picked up on the second ring. That's the thing about your best friend since 7th grade. They answer at midnight without asking why. "You sleep." I whispered, stepping into the backyard, the Georgia August air thick and heavy against my skin. I was watching the game. "What's wrong? You sound like somebody died." "Nobody died. But somebody's trying to kill everything I built." I kept my voice low. Methodical. I told him what I'd heard, every word, every number. Donnell was quiet the whole time. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "Joel. You sure you heard this right?" "Donnell. I've been married to this woman for 14 years. I know her voice." Another pause. Okay. So you need to move before 9 a.m. That's why I'm calling you." See, Donnell wasn't just my friend. He was also a financial consultant. He'd worked with offshore trust structures for high-net-worth clients for over a decade. I'd never needed that world before. I was a trucks and invoices man. Simple. Straightforward. Tonight, simple wasn't going to survive. Call nobody else, Donnell said. Not your accountant. Not your lawyer. Nobody who's been close to Renee. You don't know who she's already talked to. That hit me. My accountant, Terry, had done Renee's personal taxes too. My attorney, Barry, had drawn up our joint will. I was surrounded by shared relationships. Any one of them could have already been compromised. I have approximately 9 hours, I said. 8, Donnell corrected. We need an hour buffer. I'm calling Ernie right now. Who's Ernie? Ernie Alcott. International trust attorney. I've sent him 3 clients. He owes me. Get dressed, Joel. We're about to go to work. I looked up at the bedroom window. The light was still on. I thought about the man I was 9 hours ago. That man was already gone. Ernie Alcott didn't look like a man who moved millions of dollars through legal structures in the dark. He looked like a high school chemistry teacher, wire-rimmed glasses, a cardigan at midnight, a cup of chamomile tea steaming on his desk. His office was in Buckhead. Mahogany bookshelves, framed certificates, 3 computer monitors. He stood when Donnell and I walked in at 12:41 a.m. and extended his hand without surprise. Joel DeWitt, he said. I've heard about your company. Sit down. Saturday. I didn't waste time. I told him everything in 11 minutes flat. Ernie listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set down his tea, folded his hands, and looked at me with complete calm. The injunction won't touch what doesn't exist in your name, he said simply. Explain that. A court can freeze your personal accounts. They can freeze business accounts tied to you as the registered principal. But they cannot freeze assets held by a legally separate entity, particularly one established in a jurisdiction outside Georgia's reach before the injunction is filed. Donnell nodded. That's what I told him. Ernie pulled out a yellow legal pad. You have 8 hours. That's actually sufficient. I've restructured asset portfolios in less time during hostile corporate raids. The question isn't speed, it's precision. He began writing. I watched numbers and entity names appear on the yellow paper like he was composing music. He explained 14 offshore trusts, spread across 3 jurisdictions, Belize, the Cayman Islands, and a Cook Islands trust that Ernie called the nuclear option. Each held a portion. No single account held more than $180,000. Below reporting thresholds. Legally pristine. Everything moves tonight, Ernie said. By morning, Joel DeWitt personally owns nothing of material value. I felt something strange. Not panic. Not rage. Relief. Cold, surgical, absolute relief. How much does this cost? I asked. Ernie looked at me over his glasses. More than you want to pay. Less than what they're trying to steal. 3:17 a.m. Ernie's 3 monitors glowed like altars. The chamomile tea was cold. Donnell paced near the window like a caged animal, and I sat beside Ernie, watching the most important night of my life play out in wire confirmations and digital receipts. The first transfer cleared at 3:22 a.m. $180,000. Belize. Confirmation number. Joel. Screenshot it. I did. My hands were steady. I was in a tunnel now. That place I go when everything's on the line and emotion becomes a liability. I'd been in that tunnel before. The night the bank declined my first business loan. The morning a driver crashed one of my trucks and I had to pay out of pocket to keep the contract. Tunnel vision. Execute. Second transfer initiating, Ernie said. We moved the trucks. Not physically, the corporate ownership. Ernie had already incorporated a new entity, DeWitt Logistics Holdings LLC, in the Cook Islands at 1:30 a.m. through a colleague in their time zone. The 14 trucks transferred to that entity on paper. I was listed as a beneficiary, not an owner. Philip Gaines won't see this coming, Ernie said quietly. His strategy depends on attacking assets under your name. As of 4 a.m., there won't be any. Donnell finally stopped pacing. What about the operating accounts? The business checking? We leave $4,200 in the primary business account, Ernie said. Enough to look operational. Not enough to be worth freezing. And the contracts? I asked. The distributor agreements? Ernie smiled for the first time. Contracts aren't assets. They're obligations. The court can't freeze an obligation, Mr. DeWitt. Your clients still owe your company money. That money flows to the new entity. At 5:58 a.m., the 14th transfer confirmed. 14 accounts. 14 jurisdictions. 14 walls between Renee, Philip Gaines, and everything my father never got to own. I leaned back and exhaled for the first time in 6 hours. Donnell said, "Now what?" I said, "Now we go home. And I go back to bed." I slid back into the house at 6:34 a.m. The living room door was open now. Renee had gone back upstairs. I climbed the stairs, skipping the ones that creak, and eased back into bed. She was on her side, facing away. Her breathing was slow. Practiced. I knew immediately she wasn't actually sleeping. We were two people pretending not to know what the other one knew. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with that realization. Not hot. Not loud. It sits quiet in your sternum and presses down. I thought about the first time I saw Renee. Atlanta State Fair, 2008. She was wearing a yellow sundress and laughing at something her friend said. I remember thinking, I need to know what she's laughing at. That's the thing about falling in love. You want access to someone's joy. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost access to her. Or maybe she'd closed the door. I didn't know which happened first anymore. But I knew this. The woman in that yellow sundress wouldn't have sat on the phone with Philip Gaines planning to gut a man's livelihood at midnight. So somewhere between then and now, someone else had moved into her chest. I closed my eyes. At 8:15 a.m., I heard her get up. Shower running. Cabinet opening. The smell of coffee reached upstairs. Normal. Deliberate. A performance. At 8:47 a.m., a car pulled into the driveway. I watched through the curtain, a black sedan. A man in a charcoal suit got out carrying a manila envelope. Philip Gaines. He was younger than I expected. Maybe 35. Clean cut. Confident walk. Renee opened the door before he even knocked. I watched them shake hands like partners. At 9:03 a.m., she came upstairs with the envelope. She knocked softly, gently, like she was waking a child. "Joel," she said, "there's something you need to see." I sat up slowly, rubbed my eyes, gave her the performance she came for. "What time is it?" I asked, voice rough with manufactured sleep. She stood in the doorway in her cream robe. The envelope was in her right hand. Her left hand held her coffee mug. She looked, and I say this with 14 years of experience reading this woman, rehearsed. Her eyes weren't sad. They weren't angry. They were focused. This was a transaction to her now. "I need you to open this," she said, setting the envelope on the nightstand. I reached for it. Opened it slowly. My eyes moved across the words without rush. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Renee DeWitt v. Joel DeWitt. Filed, September 14, 9:02 a.m., Fulton County Superior Court. Attachments. Motion for immediate injunction of all business assets. Motion to establish marital property status of DeWitt Express LLC. I set the papers down. Looked at her. "Renee," I said calmly, "are you sure about this?" She blinked. She'd expected tears, maybe, or rage, or begging. 14 years, she'd built a model of me in her head, and my reaction didn't fit it. "I've been sure for a while," she said. "Okay." I nodded. "Then I guess we have a process to go through." She searched my face. Something flickered, not guilt, not yet. Just confusion. "The injunction takes effect today," she said carefully. Your accounts. I know about the injunction, I said. The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Her grip on the coffee mug tightened. How do you know? Renee. I stood up, looked her directly in the eyes. I know everything. She went absolutely still. And in that stillness, I saw the moment her whole strategy started to crack. Downstairs, I heard Philip Gaines' footsteps stop in the hallway. He'd heard me too. I walked downstairs in my t-shirt and sweats. No theatrics. No raised voice. I had learned something from Ernie Alcott last night. Composure is its own kind of power. Philip Gaines stood in my living room with his briefcase, looking at my diplomas, my framed photos, the family portrait from our 5th anniversary vacation in Montego Bay. He turned when I entered. His professional smile activated automatically. Mr. DeWitt, I'm Philip Gaines. I know who you are, I said. I sat down in my own armchair. Sit down, Philip. He didn't sit. His jaw tightened slightly. Renee came down the stairs behind me. The 3 of us stood in the geometry of a disaster. The injunction has already been filed, Philip said. Your business accounts will be frozen, I said. Yeah. Around $4,000 in there. Knock yourself out. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes did. Just for a half second. That's the thing about lawyers trained to never break composure. The tells are small. But they are real. Mr. DeWitt, I'd advise you not to obstruct. I haven't obstructed anything, I said. Everything that happened last night happened completely within the law. Ernie Alcott is a licensed international trust attorney. Every transfer was reported correctly. Every entity is legitimate. Call the Cayman Islands Financial Authority if you'd like. They have my paperwork. Philip Gaines' face didn't collapse. It calcified. A slow, terrible stillness. Renee said quietly, Joel, what did you do? I looked at her. I listened, Renee. That's all. I just listened. Philip set his briefcase on the coffee table, opened it, and began making calls. I could hear the panic beneath the professionalism, tightly contained, but present. I went to the kitchen and made myself breakfast. Scrambled eggs. Wheat toast. Orange juice. A man should eat before war. My attorney's name was Nadine Carter. I called her at 7 a.m. before Renee even came upstairs, gave her the full picture while I drank coffee in the garage. She arrived at my house at 10:30 a.m. in a white Mercedes wearing a charcoal blazer and the specific expression of a woman who had seen everything and feared nothing. She was 51, Spelman 96, and had 20 years of complex asset litigation. Donnell had referred her. Ernie had co-signed. She was, in his words, the only person in Atlanta I'd want across the table from Philip Gaines. She walked past Philip without acknowledging him. Sat across from Renee. Opened her briefcase. Placed a document on the coffee table. Renee DeWitt, Nadine said pleasantly, your injunction is targeting accounts and assets that no longer exist under your husband's direct ownership. As of 5:58 this morning, the legal structure of DeWitt Logistics and all related assets was reorganized under entities in multiple jurisdictions. What you've frozen is approximately $4,200 in an operational float account. Renee looked at Philip. Philip looked at his phone. The room was silent. Furthermore, Nadine continued, we've identified communication logs, including a recorded phone call between yourself and Mr. Gaines, in which you discussed a plan to use legal proceedings to devalue and acquire Mr. DeWitt's business through a shell company. That constitutes fraud on the court, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and potentially violates Georgia Bar Association ethics rules for Mr. Gaines specifically. Philip shot to his feet. Those recordings are inadmissible. Georgia is a one-party consent state, Nadine said without looking up. Mr. DeWitt was a party to that conversation. He was standing in his own hallway. The room tilted. Renee's coffee mug shook in her hand. I watched it all from the armchair, quiet, present, unmoved. For the first time in 14 years, I was exactly where I needed to be. Philip left first. He said 3 words, "I'll be in touch," and walked out the front door with the energy of a man recalculating every decision he'd made in the last 12 hours. Nadine stepped outside to make calls, which left Renee and me alone in the living room for the first time since the night I fell asleep next to a stranger. She was sitting on the couch, hands in her lap. That robe. The coffee mug on the table, now cold. "You were awake the whole time," she said. Not a question. "Yeah." She looked at her hands. "I've been unhappy for a long time, Joel." "I know." She looked up. I think she expected me to argue, or deflect, or pull her close. "I'm sorry I didn't say it differently," she said. I didn't trust you to leave me with anything." And there it was. The truth under the strategy. Renee had been afraid. She had constructed a scorched earth legal war because somewhere she decided I was the enemy, and she needed to win before I did. I wasn't angry at the fear. I understood fear. What I couldn't forgive was the execution. "You talked to a man about bankrupting my business," I said. "Drivers I've known for years. People with families. You were going to take all of it, Renee. Not half. All of it. And then sell it for pennies." She didn't deny it. "That's not unhappiness," I said quietly. "That's something else." She started to cry. Real tears. I believed them. And I also knew they didn't change anything. "I want a fair divorce," I told her. "Nadine will handle it. You'll be taken care of, genuinely. But the company stays mine." She nodded slowly. Broken. Tired. I stood, walked to the door, and said the last thing I ever said in that house as a husband. "I hope you find whatever you were looking for, Renee. I really do." 2 weeks after Renee was served with Nadine's counterfiling, a knock came to my office door. Not metaphorically. Literally, 2 men in suits standing at the glass door of DeWitt Express's administrative suite on Peachtree Industrial. Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Financial Crimes Unit. My heart jumped. Then settled. Ernie had told me this was possible, not because I'd done anything illegal, but because Philip Gaines had. When Nadine filed our recordings with the court, the judge had referred the matter for investigation. I was a witness, not a subject. They sat across from me with a recorder and a notepad. The lead investigator's name was Agent Calvin Reeves, late 40s, serious, the kind of man who ate lunch at his desk and called his mother on Sundays. "Mr. DeWitt, we need you to walk us through the events of September 13th. I walked them through everything. Every detail. Reeves took notes without expression. His partner, a younger woman named Agent Simone Harris, asked precise follow-up questions about Philip Gaines' role. He identified himself as the future buyer of your company's assets. Harris asked. Through a holding company he controlled, I confirmed. On the recording. Reeves set down his pen and looked at me. "Mr. DeWitt, I want to be straightforward with you. Philip Gaines has done this before. We have 2 prior complaints, never enough to prosecute. Your recording, combined with the financial paper trail, changes that picture significantly." The air shifted. "We're looking at conspiracy to commit financial fraud, abuse of process, and potentially racketeering," Reeves said. "Your cooperation is critical." I looked at Donnell, who was sitting in the corner of my office. He nodded once. "Agent Reeves," I said, "I will give you everything you need. Sometimes the ground you thought you were losing turns out to be a trap for someone else. Sometimes patience is the deadliest weapon in the room." 4 months later, Philip Gaines was disbarred. The Georgia Bar Association issued a public disciplinary order, conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, and violations of Rules 8.4a and 8.4c. His law license, suspended pending criminal proceedings. The GBI charged him with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and 1 count of racketeering. Bail set at $150,000. I found out on a Tuesday morning. Donnell texted me a news link before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. I read it twice. Set my phone down. Stared at the trucks in the yard from my office window. 14 trucks. Same as the 14 accounts that had saved everything. The divorce settled out of court 6 weeks before the criminal charges landed. Renee got the house, valued at $410,000. A fair cash settlement. Monthly alimony for 3 years, structured by Nadine with precision. No claim on the business. No stake in the assets. She had hired a new attorney after gains, a woman named Sandra Polk, who Nadine described as ethical but outmatched. The negotiation lasted 11 days. Renee didn't fight hard. I think when Gaines' scheme collapsed, something in her gave way too. I heard through mutual friends that she moved to Charlotte. New job. New apartment. I genuinely hope she's okay. What surprised me most about the whole thing wasn't the legal victory. It was what happened inside me during those 4 months, who I became in the middle of all that pressure. I stopped needing to be angry. The anger had a job at the beginning. It moved me. Got me to Ernie's office at 1 a.m. Kept me sharp when Philip stood in my living room. But anger that stays past its purpose turns toxic. I watched what it did to Renee. What it did to Gaines. I chose different. I chose my trucks. My drivers. My company. My father's name on the side of every single one. My accountant Terry called me 3 months after the settlement. Nervously. Said he'd run into Renee at dinner and wanted to be transparent about some conversations they'd had. I let him finish. Then I said, "Terry, I know. I've known for a while. Are you loyal to this company going forward?" He said yes. I believed him. Sometimes people make bad decisions inside someone else's storm. What matters is what they do when the weather clears. I kept Terry. I gave him a performance review. Set new expectations. Trust rebuilt in increments. Not assumed, not demanded. Earned. That's what nobody tells you about surviving betrayal. It doesn't end with a courtroom win or a good attorney or even 14 offshore accounts. It ends when you decide who you're going to be after the fire. DeWitt Express now has 19 trucks. I hired 2 new drivers, both veterans, both recommended through a program Donnell connected me with. Ernie Alcott sends me a Christmas card every year with a handwritten note. Agent Harris called me last spring to say the Gaines trial was proceeding and my testimony remained crucial. I said I'd be there. Donnell and I still have lunch on the first Friday of every month. Steak and sweet tea. Same place we went after my father's funeral 9 years ago. I haven't remarried. I'm not in a rush. But I go to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings now. Cook real food. Sleep well. I don't have a woman in my bed plotting, and I don't have a stranger wearing my wife's face. I have my father's name on the highway. I have drivers who show up. I have a company no one could take. And I have this story, which I'm telling you so you understand. They came for everything. I kept it all.